and welcome to another episode of the Aurora School for Artists Digital. My name is Dagmar, and today I will show you how to import your own digital media into Unity, how to best prepare these media, and what you should generally pay attention to. Digital media can be images and image sequences, videos, or even 3D objects. And there are, of course, a multitude of programs with which you can create and edit these digital media. Unity also has an asset store, where you can download pre-made 3D models, scenes, particle effects, shaders, etc. You can easily access the assets in your Unity project, or you can open the Unity Asset Store through your browser, where you have all your assets listed in your account. From there, you can open them in your respective Unity project. Today we will look at exporting from Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Blender, and start with a video file from Premiere Pro. Here in Premiere, I have created a short clip that we now want to export for our application. To do this, I go to File, Export, Media, and the Export Settings window opens. Basically, it is important that the video clip becomes as small as possible for our application, meaning it has a low resolution and is highly compressed. You certainly don't need a 4000 video for an application, as you are viewing the content on a smartphone or tablet with a relatively small screen. We also recommend that the video clip is no longer than 30 seconds. For longer videos, it's simply not the right medium. In the Settings window, I first select the export range. This can be part of the sequence, the entire work area, or in our case, the full sequence. Then I enter the clip name under Output Name in the top right and specify the storage location. And a bit further up, I select the video format in this drop-down menu. What is a video format? The video format is also called a container and contains the compressed video and audio files. The type of format is recognized by the file extension. MOV, AVI, MP4, or WEB, and the container is usually paired with a specific codec. MP4 with H.264 or the format with the codec VP8 or VP9. What is a codec? A codec is a method for encoding and decoding data. The choice of the right codec depends on several factors, such as file size or output quality. For your application, we recommend the codec H.264 or VP8, VP9. So here I choose the video format H.264 or WEB. WEB is a format that Unity also supports with an alpha channel. In our case, we do not have an alpha channel, so we choose H.260 for here. One line further down you can find numerous presets for export to various platforms like Vimeo, Twitter, mobile devices. We simply choose Match Source, Medium Bitrate, and then adjust manually. We do this further down here, in the video window. So here you can already see the basic video settings. First of all, the resolution. It is taken from the original clip. If I want to change it, I check this box, and can then change it manually. Below that, you can also find the frame rate and pixel aspect ratio, which I would leave as it is. And a bit further down, you will find the bitrate settings. What is a bitrate? Bitrate is the data transfer rate. It indicates the amount of data output per unit of time. The amount of data in a video depends on the complexity of the image, such as the resolution, the frame rate, and also the movement within the image itself. So, is the video rather uniform like our example? Video of the beach, or does it include many changes? Like fast cuts, strong movements, or many color changes? Then a slightly higher bitrate is recommended. Also recommended is a variable. Bitrate is seen here on the right in the diagram, because it adapts better to the changes in the video and is often more efficient. For our project, we choose a simple encoding pass and a low target bitrate of maximum 2. Here below you can already see the estimated file size, which should not exceed a few megabytes. If I were to increase the bitrate again, the video would become significantly larger. So back to 2. And on to export. In my Unity project, I first create, for the sake of order, in my assets folder a folder for my videos. Then right-click to create a folder. Name it Videos. And I can see it here in my hierarchy. And in this folder, I now import my videos. I can do this by drag and drop or by right-clicking Import New Asset. I navigate to my video, my MP4, and import it into the Unity project. I see the import settings here on the right in the inspector, and also a small preview of the MP4. How do I bring it now into my scene? For this, I create an object in the hierarchy or in the scene. Preferably a plane, but it can also be any other object like a quad. I'll take a plane. I take a plane. Press F for focus to zoom in on the plane. And now it is important that the size of the plane matches the size of the video. Otherwise, the video will be distorted. My video is 16:9. So I change the size of the plane here in the inspector on the right to 16:9, so 1.6 by 0.9. I can look at it from above. And now I drag the video onto the plane. Then you can see a video player has opened in the inspector. Here I can still make some settings. For example, that the video should loop. When I now switch to the game viewer first of all, align my camera with the view. When I now switch to the game view, I see that the video is played on my plane. Next, I will show you how to export a small 2D animation from After Effects and import it into Unity as an image sequence. In After Effects, I have imported a Photoshop file with all layers and created a small animation from it. You should already ensure that the Photoshop file is as small as possible, so a low resolution of a maximum of 150 dpi, and also a small image size. The fly is, for example, 350 by 480 pixels. If you are using an image marker in your application, and you want the animation or the clip to fit exactly on the image marker, you need to create the Photoshop file already in the size of the image marker. Otherwise, there will be distortions later. We export the animation only as a PNG image sequence. To do this, we go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Then the render queue opens here at the bottom. Here we again specify the output name and storage location. Under the Output Module menu, and clicking on it opens the settings window for the output. Here we again select the format, in our case, the PNG sequence. And under Video Output, we select the channel RGB in alpha. We have a transparent background that we want to export as well. Click OK and click Render. In our folder, we now find the PNG sequence with a PNG image for each frame in the animation. To import my PNG sequence, I again create a folder in Unity where I store the sequence. Right-click Create Folder. I name it Sequence. In there. And if it doesn't already exist, I also create an Animations folder where the animation will be saved later. Folder. Animation. I right-click Import New Asset. Navigate to my PNG sequence. I select all and import them into Unity. I select all PNGs with Command A and set the texture type to Sprite to D and UI in the import settings in the inspector. And make sure that Alpha is set to transparency here, because we want the background to be transparent. We go further down, and we see that it has applied the transparency to all PNGs. I again select all PNGs with Command A and drag them into my hierarchy to bring them into the scene. Unity automatically creates a new animation, which I save in my previously created Animations folder. I simply call it Slide Animation. Save. So here you see it has created the animation. And also in the animation window, it has created a keyframe animation from this PNG sequence. So now when we go to the game view, now, we see the animation of the fly. Just a little note. If I switch to the animation of the fly here, I can set a loop in the inspector box to make the animation loop. In the third section, we will discuss preparing your 3D models in the open source software Blender, exporting from Blender and importing these 3D files into Unity. Whether you create your models yourself or download them from somewhere, the most important thing is to keep the polygon count of the models low. For performance reasons, you should only use low-poly objects with a few hundred or thousand polygons, depending on the complexity of the scene. You should not exceed a total of 100,000 polygons. In Blender, we first take a look at the scaling and rotation of our model. In the window on the right, you can see the transform components, the position of the object, the rotation, the scaling, and the dimensions in meters. If this window is not displayed for you, you can toggle it with the N key on your keyboard. We see that the object is slightly scaled and has a slight rotation. Before we export the object, we need to apply the rotation and scaling values. I select the object in Object Mode, go to Object, Apply, Rotation and Scale. We see that the values for rotation and scaling are reset to 0 and 1. Thus, the object can be inserted into Unity in the correct size and in the correct rotation. Next, we check the so-called pivot point. This is a small yellow dot that every object has. This point determines the transformation of the object, i.e. the rotation, position, and scaling. For example, if I rotate this object, you can see that the pivot point is the center of the rotation. It also determines the position, where the object will be placed later in Unity. If this pivot point is shifted or far away from the object, it can lead to undesirable shifts in Unity. Therefore, we set the pivot point, ideally to the center of the object, or to its base here at the bottom. There are various commands in Blender for this. I select the object again and right-click. To open this small context menu, here we find the Set Origin Point, and I choose Origin to Geometry. This sets the pivot point to the center of the object. I can also manually move the pivot point. To do this, I select the tool. In this small side menu on the right, click on Affect Only Origins, and can then move the pivot point with the usual transforms. So the X, Y, and Z axis can be adjusted and moved. I can also use a 3D cursor to position the pivot point. If I want to have the pivot point at the bottom of the space, I select the object, switch to Edit Mode, and select a polygon here, a face of my object. Hold Shift and press S to open the Snap menu, and choose Cursor to Selected. The 3D cursor jumps to the selected face. I switch back to Object Mode with the Tab key. Right-click in the Context menu, and go to Set Origin, and again to Origin to 3D Cursor. The pivot point jumps to the position of the 3D cursor. Next, we check the orientation of the polygon faces of our object. Each face has a so-called normal direction. This can be displayed in the Overlay menu. I switch to Edit Mode with the Tab key. And choose Normals here in the Overlay menu at the bottom. And each face now has a small blue line. This is a visualization of the normal direction, and it shows the direction in which it is rendered. In Blender, we don't worry too much about it. Blender renders both directions. In Unity, however, for performance reasons, only one side of the face is rendered, namely the normal direction. So we need to flip the red faces. To do this, I select the faces with the Alt key and click on the normal direction. This opens the normal menu, and I simply click on Flip. And these faces are flipped to show the correct render direction. As the last step, we want to reduce the polygon count of the object, as we will later pack the textures of the model onto the low poly model. I first create a copy with the Shift key and D. I rename the second object in the hierarchy now as low poly. and hide the high poly object for now. In Blender, we use the Decimate modifier for mesh reduction. We select the low poly model and see the Modifier Properties tab here in the Properties window. That's the wrench icon. Select the Decimate modifier. Here below we now see the polygon count of the object, 4,583. That's relatively high. To reduce this number, we drag the ratio down. We see the polygon count decreasing. And if we look at the model, we also see that we are losing quite a bit of detail the fewer polygons we have. Therefore, we need to find a good ratio with the lowest possible polygon count, where the model still looks detailed. Afterward, we need to apply the modifier so that the reduction is transferred to the mesh. To do this, I click on the small arrow and select Apply. The modifier disappears from the list, can no longer be changed, and is applied to the mesh. After the reduction, we create a new UV map. We switch the UV editing workspace at the top and select all polygons with the A key. Unwrap them by pressing U and select Smart UV Project. I leave the default settings and click OK. And thus have created a new UV map. When I now switch back to the Layout workspace, we see that the new UV map has caused some unwanted shifts and stretching in the texture. This doesn't matter for now, as we will now transfer the texture from the high poly to the low poly model. For this, I first create a new material in the Materials tab. I delete the existing material and create a new material by pressing New. I name it Hand_Low Poly. The object must be selected. To pack the texture onto the object, I need an empty image texture. I create it here in the node editor by pressing Shift+A, going to Texture and selecting Image Texture. Press New to create a new empty image texture. I name it Hand_Diffuse. Here you can also define the resolution of the texture. For this small model, a texture with 512 by 512 pixels is probably enough. OK. I can display my empty diffuse texture in the UV editor window. Since it is still empty, it is black. It is now important that this image texture is selected. So if it is not selected, select it once. Now we switch to the Bake menu. It is important that you have selected Cycles as a render engine. And if you scroll a bit further down, you will see the Bake menu. We will now redisplay the high poly hand. And select the high poly hand first, then with Command key press the low poly hand. The low poly hand should be selected in yellow. This means it is the active object, because we want to bake from the high poly to the low poly object. It is important that these two objects are in the same position. I choose Bake Type Diffuse. 1. Choose the color. And under Contribution, I deselect Direct and Indirect Lighting. The important setting here is Selected to Active. We want to bake from the selected high poly object to the active low poly object. It takes a few minutes to bake the texture. When the texture is baked, it appears in the UV editor window on the left. It is important to save the texture now. By clicking on the Image menu, then Save As, and save it in your folder as image. And if I now connect the image texture with my base color, I hide the high poly object. We see that we have baked the texture onto the low poly object. I repeat the process for all parameters of the material that I want to save in an image texture. Now I also bake the normal map. The normal map saves the surface structures of the material. I add another empty image texture by pressing Shift+, selecting Texture, and then Image Texture, creating a new texture, and naming it hand_normal map. OK. I select it here again. I select the high poly object with Command key, the low poly object, and go to the Bake menu. I select Bake Type Normal. And click on Bake. I save the normal texture again under the Image menu. And to connect the normal map with my shader, I set the color space to non-color. Add a normal map node by pressing Shift+, select Vector, then Normal Map. Connect color to color and normal to normal. And if I now hide the high poly object again, we see that we have our surface structures. Also on the low poly object, you can also apply this baking process. If you have created your material procedurally in Blender, in that case, you would deselect Selected to Active and bake directly onto the low poly object. So now we can export the object. I select the low poly object, go to File, Export, FBX. FBX is a common 3D format. It can also export textures and animations. Other common formats are GLTF or OBJ. We use FBX. This opens the export window. I select Selected Objects because I only want to export my selected low poly object. I leave the other settings as default. Here at the top, I select Path Mode to copy. And check the box next to Embed Textures to include the baked textures in the FBX file. And click Export. In Unity, I now import the object by either dragging and dropping it into the Assets browser, or by right-clicking in the Assets browser, selecting Import New Asset, and navigating to the folder. When I select the object here in the project window, I see the FBX import settings. First, I extract the textures and materials. I click on Extract Textures and choose the corresponding folder. When I look down here, I see my to-bake textures, as well as the material. I extract it and save it in the corresponding folder under Materials. Now, when I drag the object into the hierarchy, I see my hand and the corresponding textures in the material slots. That was it for importing digital media. See you.